What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Sloppy Saturdays. And today, as we continue with our draft coverage, as we've been in the last month, we are talking about the two best tight ends in this draft class. We are talking about Kenyon Sadiq and Eli Stowers. We are talking about how if you get either of these tight ends, or if you're a team choosing between either, how both play styles are vastly different. We're talking about also how their college careers are vastly different as well. And we're going to discuss their placement in the NFL draft, and we're basically going to discuss who I think should go first. Now, when we talk about Kenyon Sadiq, we have been talking about him this entire draft process. We really discussed how he's one of my favorite prospects. When we look at Kenyon Sadiq, we had him mocked up in our first round, going number 22 to the Chargers. We also discussed him in the NFL Combine, how he absolutely tore up that NFL Combine. But we haven't shined much light Eli Stowers' way, and I think we should, because I think Eli Stowers can definitely be a premier weapon in the NFL. We're going to talk about Eli Stowers first. Now, Eli Stowers has a very unique journey when it comes to his journey in college football. He started out committing to Texas A&M as a quarterback. Then he transferred to New Mexico for a year, and he was a quarterback / tight end there. He was paired up with Diego Pavia there. Then him and Diego Pavia go to Vanderbilt for 2 years. Now, I believe that was the best decision they could have made. They showed how they could be premier threats in college football, a premier duo in college football, and now Vanderbilt has looked in a much different light than they were before they came. So that was a phenomenal transfer by them. That New Mexico team, a lot of players and coaching staff going to Vanderbilt. Again, they made their way in the SEC for sure. When we look at Eli Stowers, I think Eli Stowers is by far the best route runner at the tight end position in his entire draft class, and I think it really comes down to his background as a quarterback. When we look at him being able to read defenses much better than any tight end, that's because of him being a quarterback. Then we also look again with his placement in the field, knowing where to be, and his instincts. That really has to do with him being a quarterback as well. But where I believe him starting out as a quarterback truly has hurt him is in the blocking game. I believe this guy is nowhere near right now an NFL tight end blocker at all. I believe when you look at the tight ends in this draft class, he's definitely in the lower tier when it comes to blocking. And I do think that makes it very limited on what teams can select him. And it also makes him very limited on which teams and on how teams can use him. When you look at Eli Stowers, if you use him as your primary tight end without a two tight end set, I do believe you're sacrificing a lot of blocking on your team. And then again, the real way you're going to have to use him is in two tight end sets with another tight end. A tight end that's more of a blocking tight end, he's going to have to be your third receiver. Eli Stowers in the NFL is really going to have to prove that he could be that premier weapon as a route runner. And he, like I said, he's a receiver playing the tight end position, but he really has to show that he could have receiving production that a wide receiver could have. Like, this has to be a guy in his prime that averages 1,000+ yards each season, or he's going to have to develop much better as a blocker. Because like I said, him starting out as a quarterback and him not playing the tight end position his whole life, I do believe he is one of the worst blockers when it comes to tight ends going into his NFL draft. So very similar to a guy like a Travis Kelce or even a Dalton Kincaid. Like I said, I do think his play style is similar to Travis Kelce. I don't want to compare him to one of the best tight ends of all time, but very similar to Dalton Kincaid as well, who was a true receiving threat coming out of college. You're going to have to put this guy in two tight end sets because you're going to sacrifice blocking if he's your only tight end on the field. So I do think that really comes down to either him having to improve vastly as a blocker, or, like I said, you're going to have to put him alongside another tight end, which limits the amount of teams in their offensive scheme that could take him. When we look at tight ends in the NFL, I believe over 50% of their production really comes down to blocking. Like, you have to be able to block as a tight end. This is where Eli Stowers is so far away. But like I said, he does separate himself in the receiving game in the last 2 years at Vanderbilt, showing what he could do as a premier receiving option. So I do think it gets down to very interesting who is going to take this guy and who could afford to take this guy. Like I said, if you're a true running threat team, if you're a run-the-football team, he might not be the guy to take you because he cannot block right now. Like I said, for Eli Stowers, either he's going to have to develop as a blocker to be more useful in the NFL, or like I said, he's going to have to be a premier receiving threat, a 1,000-yard receiver tight end in the NFL to really be utilized, because you're going to have to put another tight end alongside him as a blocker. So it is very interesting for Eli Stowers. This is why I do believe his game is not complete compared to Kenyon Sadiq, and this is why I do think he's going to be the second tight end taken, but it's going to be in the second or third round. I don't think he could climb into the first round because how much of blocking is important to a tight end. he just flat out is not to the level where he should be. Then when you look at Kenyon Sadiq, why I believe Kenyon Sadiq separates himself from Eli Stowers and why I do believe Kenyon Sadiq is going to be a first rounder. I do believe Kenyon Sadiq, again, is a really good blocker when it comes down to what he did for Oregon this year. I think Oregon had so much depth in the run game, and I do think they relied on him as a blocker, and he was that standalone blocker at the tight end position for a majority of the year. Now, when you look at Kenyon Sadiq compared to Eli Stowers coming into their route of college football, like I agree, Kenyon Sadiq's numbers aren't all that impressive when you look at a career. Like Kenyon Sadiq is a guy that only has 892 yards in his career in college football. And you guys may be saying, like, how is this guy going to be a first-round tight end? First off, Kenyon Sadiq's career is very unique as well, because when you look at Kenyon Sadiq, he was behind Terrence Ferguson and Patrick Herbert in his first 2 years, where, again, he wasn't on the field all that much in comparison to other tight ends who were the only tight ends on their team. When you look at Terrence Ferguson, he was a mid-round draft pick last year. To the Rams, he was a very talented tight end. Kenyon Sadiq was behind him. This year was the first year where he really was, again, the premier tight end for Oregon. I thought he was phenomenal this year. Again, I think 8 touchdowns is a number you have to highlight, him being a red zone threat. The biggest thing with Kenyon Sadiq, why I love this guy so much, because I think he's an athletic freak. I think he's a mismatch that just Eli Stowers isn't, and that's why I believe Kenyon Sadiq can even be as big or even better as a receiving threat than Eli Stowers, even though it may not have the route running. I do believe Kenyon Sadiq, at his size, being bigger than Eli Stowers and being much faster than Eli Stowers, testing at a 4.39 in the combine, which, again, was a record since Vernon Davis. At his size, I do think he's going to be very hard for linebackers to cover because of his speed and being the same size as a linebacker. And then I think for secondary players to guard him, he's just going to be way too small. He's bigger than Eli Stowers, he's faster than Eli Stowers, and he's more explosive than Eli Stowers. So I think, again, he could be even better than Eli Stowers in the passing game, all because of these physical gifts. Like I said, then when you look at Kenyon Sadiq, as complete of a player he is, I do think he's one of the best blocking tight ends in this entire draft class. Like I said, I do think he can improve blocking at the point of attack. But when we look at how Oregon's run game was utilized this year, with how many running backs they've had, and how he was required to block so much in this offense, I think he's an above-average blocker for sure. So I think, again, Kenyon Sadiq, as a physical specimen, how he can only improve in the receiving game because of how hard it's going to be for anybody on a defense to cover him. Then when you look at, again, his experience blocking, he has the complete game over Eli Stowers. Like I said, Eli Stowers is going to be one of those players where, again, like I said, him having that quarterback background makes him by far the best route runner in this entire draft class for sure. It gives him the instinct, and not only that, it gives him the ability to read coverages at a higher rate than any other tight end in the class. But Eli Stowers is not an NFL blocking tight end right now. So, again, you're going to have to pair him alongside another tight end, or you're going to have to sacrifice blocking ability with him being the only tight end on the field for your team. So I think for Eli Stowers, it is not a wide range of NFL teams that can draft him. I think it has to be very specific to your offensive scheme. And if you're a run-heavy NFL team, Eli Stowers really cannot be used that effectively for you. Eli Stowers, like I said, is going to have to be a premier weapon in the NFL at the tight end position, where he's going to have to average 1,000 yards every single season, or he's going to have to vastly improve as a blocker because, like I said, his game is not complete. And like I said, for most tight ends, especially in the NFL, 60% of your game really comes down to blocking, whether you're not used in the route tree or whether it comes down to if you're on a rush-heavy team, you have to be able to block. I think that, again, what separates players. And like I said, for Eli Stowers, very similar to a Dalton Kincaid or a Travis Kelce, if he's going to be that elite route running guy, that elite receiving guy, there's going to have to be another tight end next to him. And he's going to really have to show that he's more valuable than a wide receiver 3. And he's a true wide receiver playing the tight end position. Like I said, Eli Stowers, I believe, is an elite weapon when it comes to route running and receiving. And I do think he is very valuable to go in the second or third round of this NFL draft. Why I believe he's not a first-round receiver, like I said, tight end position comes down so much to how you block. And Eli Stowers right now is so far away from that. Can he improve? Sure. Why I like Kenyon Sadiq so much more over him, like I said, with his explosiveness and speed, I do think he could be an even better receiver threat than Eli Stowers due to his physical ability. And then when you look at blocking compared to the two, it's night and day. I mean, Kenyon Sadiq is a really good blocker right now. Eli Stowers can't block right now. Biggest difference between the two. That wraps up this episode on Sloppy Saturdays on the 2 top tight ends in this draft. Like I said, Eli Stowers for me is a second and third round guy. Kenyon Sadiq is a bona fide first round guy. That wraps this episode of Sloppy Saturdays. Drop down below your thoughts on Eli Stowers, your thoughts on Kenyon Sadiq. Who would you rather have? What teams do you think Eli Stowers will really succeed in with his unique play style? And we are